Hey everyone, welcome to Singletrack. My name's Will, and today we're going to talk to you about a rather simple and cheap upgrade for your front suspension. Firstly, we're going to talk about what it is, then we're going to talk about how it actually works, and lastly, we're going to talk about what the effect is like on the trail and whether this is an upgrade worth considering for yourself. So what is it? This is a volume spacer. It's called the Neopos spacer, and it's made by the Italian disc brake and suspension manufacturer Formula. You may be familiar with other volume spacers on the market from RockShox, which use bottomless tokens in their forks, and Fox, which also uses a plastic volume spacer. The concept's pretty simple. The more spacers you use inside the air spring, the smaller the volume, and the more the suspension ramps up towards the end of the travel to help prevent bottoming out. Compared to those plastic volume spacers, this one's a little bit different. As you can tell, it's actually squishy. It's made of a closed cell compressible foam. Now, Formula won't tell us exactly what it's made of, but we can tell you it's made in Italy, and it's a type of aerated silicon type foam, something like that. So why is it compressible? The idea is that towards the end of the travel, you get a lot of air pressure building inside the air spring of your fork. With this compressible spacer, it actually shrinks as that air pressure builds inside the air spring of your fork. The idea here is to make that end part of the travel a little bit smoother and to reduce how aggressively the fork ramps up at the end of the stroke. Now, Formula have made the Neopos spacer for use with their own forks, and that includes the 33, the 35, the Silver, and the new Nero downhill fork. Technically though, you can fit this into any fork with stanchions that are bigger than 33 millimeters. Formula doesn't recommend using the Neopos spacer with any forks other than its own, but that hasn't stopped us from trying. We've run this Neopos spacer in about half a dozen forks so far, and that includes a couple of different Fox 36s, a couple of Fox 34s, an X-Fusion McQueen, and also Formula's own 35 and Silver fork. And the results have been interesting to say the least. In short, it works. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It smoothens out the end of the travel and gives you a slightly less harsh ramp up towards the end of the stroke. The other effect that the Neopos spacer has is a little more subtle, and this is to do with the way that it affects both compression and rebound. In short, it helps to linearize the air spring curve, and it gives a little bit more reactivity for altering between low speed and high speed impacts. We found this to be more noticeable in bigger travel forks, where you're typically riding at faster speeds and you're hitting things faster with more force as well. On this really kind of fast, high-speed, chattery stuff, think washboard type trails, I found the fork to be more compliant and more responsive to those impacts. The other area I noticed it was in really rough, chopped up rock gardens where you've got small hits, medium-sized hits, and big hits in completely random succession. I found the fork felt more consistent, and it also felt more comfortable. In back-to-back testing, that was quite noticeable at the grips, where the fork just felt more comfortable with less of those vibrations coming through to the rider. Now, I also had the opportunity to try the Neopos inside an air shock. In fact, I ran it in the Santa Cruz Blur just behind me here. I had to cut a tiny little slice of a regular Neopos spacer because the air can on this bike is quite small. With the Neopos spacer inside, I did find a difference, but it was quite subtle. There was a slight boost in progression because you are taking up volume by putting this inside the air spring. But I did find again that at those high speed, high frequency impacts, there was a little bit more compliance to the rear shock with this squishy spacer inside. The difference was pretty subtle, and this mirrors our experience with testing the Neopos spacer in shorter travel forks. Generally on a cross country or trail bike, you're not riding at the same speeds that you would be on a big travel enduro bike. So the difference of running this inside the fork is less apparent. So, would I recommend the Neopos spacer? If you're already running a Formula fork, then 100% yes. This is a great little upgrade, and it's way easier to adjust air volume inside your Formula fork using a Neopos spacer than adding or subtracting oil. Now, what about those of you out there who don't own a Formula fork? Well, officially, Formula doesn't recommend using this in any fork other than their own. And I don't think brands like Fox and RockShox are going to be that keen with you putting squishy bits inside their product. So if you are going to do this, please do so at your own risk. One thing worth mentioning is I didn't experience any durability issues with the Neopos spacer in any of the forks we tested. However, with the rear shock and the small segment that I cut off, I did have some degradation issues. So after about 2 months of testing, I found small specks of foam floating around inside the lubrication oil in the air can. With that in mind, it's not something I want to run longer term. unless you were going to be cleaning and maintaining a rear shock quite regularly, then I don't know if this would be worth doing for the potential damage that it could cause. Now, if you want to read the full feature on the Neopos spacer and our experience testing this little compressible spacer, jump on singletrackworld.com to find the full review. And if you've got any questions for me, drop them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And if you like this video, please subscribe and we'll have many more videos coming your way. All right, thanks guys. Tooroo.